welcome to the Gambling Gauchos. I'm Rob Bro. He's Kyle Jacobson. He's Money Mainville. We got a show for you tonight. What's on the Payne Pal Truden Chandler rundown? Well, we're going to do a little Curt Cignetti is I can't say what I was going to say. He's a goober. He might have passed Dorkowitz for me, by the way. So we'll talk a little Curt Cignetti. We'll talk a little Thomas Tuberville. We'll talk a little Donald Trump and executive orders. Not to get political. A little Nick Saban in there as well. We'll do a basketball rundown of where we are currently with the roster this spring. And a mailbag. So that's the Payne Pal Truden Chandler rundown. If you're joining us on Dave Campbell's podcast network, new name alert. Thank you for joining us. If you are on the Patreon, as always, thank you. Patreon.com/GamblingGauchos if you want the full episodes and more content via the written word and Discord access. It's all on the Patreon, patreon.com/GamblingGauchos. Or on the YouTube. Hit that like button. Smash that subscribe button. Got me feeling nicey there. All right. That is the Payne Pal Truden Chandler rundown. Money, let's start with basketball. I don't think we've added any new bodies since the last time you and I spoke about basketball, but I do feel like we have a clearer picture of what the roster might be.
Yeah, I don't remember if we got a chance to talk live about Bam and his addition. That was your most recent activity, was picking him up. I'm really excited about it. I wrote about it on our Patreon whenever it happened. But I think he's going to be the best shot blocker to come through this program since Tariq Owens. And I don't even really think it's going to be particularly close. He's got really good athleticism, really good feel and instinct on that end of the floor. Kind of how what I think Owens did really well was just anticipating shots, even when he wasn't directly in front of a guy, so whether he was coming around a guy's side, coming from behind. He was able to pick up on a lot of those shots and affect them. He wasn't just a straight up shot blocker. And that's what I see a lot of in Luke B. Still trying to work on the last name. That's why I'm not saying it all, but it's Bamgboye. Bamboye, maybe. Bamboy. I feel like either one of those two is probably a safe bet. I feel like I like the silent G. But I like his game a lot. A little limited offensively. Can't hear anything you're saying, Rob.
What about a Bamboye?
I like that. I like Bamboye. That rolls off the tongue.
Is that any relation to Bam Adebayo?
I don't believe so.
Because I know we were after, was it Lauri Markkanen's cousin or somebody we were after?
Yeah, something like that. The Finnish brothers.
Yeah, we're going after a lot of NBA pedigree.
Yeah.
Lauri Markkanen, Bam Adebayo.
That's what we do. Program builders.
All right, anyway, sorry to interrupt.
But I like his game a lot, and I think he kind of rounds you out in the front court really well. JT Toppin for all his salt, and he's going to be National Player of the Year good next year. Struggled at times defensively. And so I feel like getting a guy like him coming off the bench to kind of supplement those 15 minutes a game where you don't have Toppin, I think it's a really good counter to what he gives you offensively. But I think kind of where you're at now, you've probably seen it and felt it if you follow this team closely, is things are slowing down a little bit, and you're not quite making the splashes and the additions that you were in the early part of the cycle. And that's to be expected at this point. The portal's closed. There's no more incoming talent. What you've spent big on, you've probably already gotten that out of the way. But it's going to be interesting because I still think that there are quite a few holes on this team. I wrote about it last week, and just some of my initial feels on this roster as a whole. And I think it's a good team. I just think you've got some holes that can be exploited. And I think, in May, it's probably a little ridiculous to be saying this, but if the roster as it was now tipped off and played a game as if it were November 3rd against Lindenwood, I would have a pretty clear idea of where I think they're going to win games and where I think they have a real chance to lose them. So it's an interesting spot.
Is it fair to say that much hinges on how big of a step Christian Anderson takes? Because from my vantage point, he had a very, what's a good word? Kind of like intriguing freshman year where you 100% see flashes of greatness and you think this guy could be really special someday. Like if he's more or less the same player he was last year and he's supposed to be your number 2, that's probably maybe not a very good thing. But if he does take a big step or two and is your second best player, then you could have a really good kind of duo, one in the front court, one in the back court. And I think also a lot hinges on the guy from Wazoo that's kind of the de facto Darion Williams replacement. But do you see it the same way that a lot is dependent on how big of a step Christian Anderson takes? The reason I highlight him instead of JT Toppin is I feel like it's baked in. You already got basically first-team All-American caliber play from him last year, and so that's kind of already baked into the equation for me.
Yeah, for sure. I think you're right, and I wrote about it, and I said he's got to have the biggest sophomore year jump since Jarrett Culver, at least in this program. He's got to have that level of improvement, and I think what makes that a little bit concerning is he's going to have to do it out of position. I mean, he looks like your lead guard right now, and there were times last year where you saw him operating the pick and roll with JT Toppin, and it looked good. He looked comfortable in those situations, but there's no denying that he's always been a score-first guard and not a playmaker in the sense that, say, an Elijah Hawkins was. So it's going to be really interesting because I think he is going to shoulder a lot of that load. Kyle, I think you bring up a really good point in Lawan Watts and what he brings to this team. I mean, I think he's going to essentially play co-lead guard with Christian Anderson. That's how I see it right now, because I think he's going to have to. I think Lawan Watts has proven that he's a high caliber playmaker at the D1 level. Christian Anderson has not, but he has the tools to be that. I mean, Lawan Watts, I was digging into his game a lot this past weekend. He's a 99th percentile assist rate guy. Like, he is, by the metrics, one of the best playmakers in college basketball. The issue is it's not really, he's not a lead ball handler. He was a pick and roll ball handler only in 10% of situations last season. So he's really making plays off the ball because he struggles so much with turnovers. I think he had, like a 25% turnover rate, meaning about 1 in 4 possessions that go through him end in a turnover. It's not good. So I think you're going to kind of have to bounce his secondary playmaking abilities and what he can do off the ball at a low usage rate, with Christian Anderson kind of being more hands-on, initiating, get to the basket, run the pick and roll situations.
Are you worried about the schedule?
I have a lot of thoughts on it, and I feel like I talk about it every offseason. And the reality is it's probably never going to change because it's not changing. To be fair, like, I look at a schedule like Baylor's and I get envious. Like, they play a tough non-conference every year. They put themselves in those situations. They'll play anybody. And I love that. Part of me loves that. But you also have a school like Iowa State that plays a pretty conservative non-conference schedule, does not play a lot of tough matchups. They'll play Iowa, but they don't really, play these Q1 games on the road against Kentucky or, Duke. And so there's kind of each side of the equation in the Big 12. And I think for a long time, you've tried to play in the middle, which is where, everything you do at home and kind of in a regular home or away environment is going to be pretty neutral. But if you're going to go off-site and play somewhere, say in the Bahamas, you're going to be playing a tougher pool, and you're going to say, yeah, the 3 games that I get out of this, multi-team invitational is good enough to supplement playing teams that were 358th in KenPom last year. And I think, again, that's the way it's kind of shaping up to be this year. I think what you kind of bank on is that game with A&M coming to fruition, which Nathan Geis has talked about a couple of times at the Lubbock Avalanche Journal. I trust that he has a much better read on that situation than I do. It just kind of seems like that game was fluid for the past couple of years, and what they did to you last year going and playing in the NIL tournament seems kind of up in the air. But if that game comes to fruition, that's going to be a good game on your schedule. I don't know if they'll have the preseason prestige that they've gotten under Buzz Williams, but I do think that they'll be a high finisher in KenPom towards the end of the year. So it's interesting. I don't like playing Lindenwood. I don't like playing New Orleans. I wish you were even playing a 280th team in KenPom at that point, whether it be like a UNC Greensboro or somebody like that. I think it'd do you a lot of good. But again, you win a lot of games in the Big 12, it doesn't matter. And that played out right in front of your eyes this past season.
Have you seen Arizona's non-con?
Yeah.
Like, could they share one of those opponents with us?
Yeah, and it's interesting because certain coaches seem to have the philosophy and others don't. Like Mark Few and Gonzaga has always been that way because they're Gonzaga. And the entire year they're going to be hearing you didn't play anybody. So they'll go play Kentucky. They'll go play Duke. They don't care. They'll go play those games. And Tommy Lloyd, obviously a Mark Few guy, kind of shares that same philosophy. So it's curious that Scott Drew has kind of come around to that. Now, Scott Drew played a non-NCAA team this past season over like New Year's break. Like he made everybody come and play a game on Christmas break, I think, which was odd. But he will go and play those really competitive non-conference games. So maybe McCaslin comes around to it after you get this A&M monkey off your back and you can kind of have some options open for the future. Maybe you get a good home and home with Iowa. I would love that. Love it so much, even though I think they probably end up taking one of those games because I really trust Ben McCollum. But I think even a game like that just does you so much good early in the season to get a good pulse on your team. I mean, you don't want those issues coming to light again against the St. Joe's. A good caliber team, top 100 team, but an opponent to where if you lose that game, your fan base is going to be sweating. And we were last year, man. We were.
Certainly. I'd like to see the full schedule before I go full freak out, but the Big East Challenge is off the books now, right? Or is there one more?
I think you're done. I could be wrong. There might be one more. No, because I think DePaul was the cherry on the top last season. Yeah. I think so. Yeah. So
it'll be interesting to see what happens there too, because now you've lost, two. I would love a Big Ten matchup, but I don't think that'll happen. It was nice to have the Big East in tow. Maybe something works out with the ACC. I don't know. But I do think the basketball roster is in a good spot. What about the kid from Miami?
Yeah, developing situation. I thought there was I thought that guy was going to be on your roster for sure, even this past weekend. Now it's kind of up in the air.
Okay.
I think you've got him and a couple of international options that you're keeping an eye on right now, but I don't think you do much outside of those two situations.
Okay. If A&M does happen, we're going to set the points, rebounds, assists total for Federico at 8.5.
Under.
All right.
Did y'all see Fetty 2 times walking around Lubbock grocery stores in double T gear?
Yeah. Which, to be fair,
honestly, it kind of rubs me the wrong way, not because, like, I feel betrayed by him. It's like, oh, just, leave and wear your Aggie gear. Just like these guys are just hired mercenaries. It's like he doesn't care what logo's on his sweatshirt, which is kind of sad in college sports because, like, it's supposed to be all about the rivalries. And if you transfer from Tech to A&M, that should be, like, a big deal. And I don't know. Clearly he likes the swag. He likes the gear that he gets to wear. And it's like, oh, well, yeah, if A&M gives me a pay bump, I'll just go over there for my next season. It's kind of sad. That's all.
I guess he hadn't gotten his A&M gear yet. And he's still in class here, I would assume.
Yeah, I guess they probably got finals this week or something.
Yeah. So, all right. On to football. Any basketball fun? Basketball. Give me the ball, and I'm gonna dunk it.
There's a good Darion Williams interview at his workout today. We should talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah, or we could do it right now if you want.
We could, yeah.
So he was with the Kings today. Can I interject one time real quick? Did we get a name on the dog?
It's a Maple. Can you hear her?
A little bit.
Yeah, she's in a nut job.
Maple, you said?
Yeah.
I like that. Like
Like-
big,
Like
big
Fardos, yeah. She's named after Fardos Mac.
That's amazing. All right. So tell us about this because you put the big smiley face in the Discord. Did you? Well, hold on. We're in a public forum. I don't want to make you give too much away here, but you're still trending on him going to the NBA. Let's say that.
Yeah, I think so. And I will say, like, it was I thought a really good interview. He talked about Texas Tech playing in the postseason, playing against Florida specifically. And, you know, when he was talking about Tech, consistently referred to them as we, which I think is, you know, take that for what it's worth. I think, as I've said this entire time, nobody knows what's going on in this situation. And I think there's been a lot of assumptions made and a lot of, like, maybe the feeling of, like, oh, yeah, like, you shouldn't be using we. Like, are you even one of us anymore? Like, you went to the transfer portal, you did this, whatever. I just, again, I think nobody knows what's going on. That was one of my takeaways. Was he was obviously, like, proud to be playing in that game, probably did not want to end his season with his teammates that way, seemed very positive about Texas Tech as a whole. I just thought it was interesting, and he referenced this in the interview. It was really great audio. I really think anybody that hasn't seen it should go listen to it. But he talks about, like, not being the greatest athlete in the world, and, like, knowing that for a long time that's kind of been just a part of his game. And, like, I really liked what he said, and it reminded me a lot of what I feel like I've seen from Darion Williams on the court the past 2 years. Was like, yeah, I know I'm not the greatest athlete, but I know how to play basketball. And so I'm going to go find ways to be a productive basketball player, even if I'm not the most athletic guy on the floor. I'm going to go be tougher than you. I'm going to use my footwork to beat you. I'm going to outsmart you, whatever. And I think that's really emblematic of how he plays the game. He just kind of plays in a way, to me, and I said this more his sophomore year than I did his junior year. He plays kind of like Luka, man. And I think that's why I really like him, is because, again, not comparing playability, but play style. He plays a step slower. He will use his strength and he will use his footwork to draw contact and to put you in situations that are uncomfortable. I thought it was really interesting that he said that. And then a reporter asked him a question like, what's the most consistent piece of feedback you've gotten throughout this process? And he said, oh, just being in better conditioning, being in conditioning for the NBA. And so I just want to say, I think it's really interesting that I got accused of fat shaming a guy for like 5 months for saying, hey, this guy's really good at basketball. He'd probably be an even better basketball player if he was in a little bit of better shape this year. And that's what the league has been telling him. But again, I think you got to go back to what he said. Hey, I know I'm not the greatest athlete in the world. I'm still going to find ways to beat you. And he did. He did consistently. There's no arguing about that. On the biggest stage, he proved that. It's just an interesting dynamic with him, man. It's a complex situation. And it kind of reminds me of how I felt watching Luka, again, to a much lesser degree. Like, watching Luka, I'm like, this guy is a once-in-a-lifetime basketball talent. I didn't really think that about D5. I did think this guy's an elite college basketball player. And if he can play a step faster, stay on top of his game to be, to want to be better than you in every single aspect of the game, he's going to be something special. And so it's just a weird dynamic where, like, yeah, neither of those guys are like affiliated with the teams that I root for and watch often anymore. And now they're kind of in this situation. It's just a weird place to be. I don't know if anybody else feels the same way as I do, but I think it's part of what makes the situation so intriguing to me. It's because it's like, yeah, this is what I've lived through since I thought Shams got hacked.
We need to get in championship shape, the roster. Just like JJ said. All right. Let's see. Let's flip over to football. Spring football's over. We got kind of a lot of just knick-knack, paddywhack stories to go through. Let's start with Curt Cignetti, who was talking to CBS Sports this week and said, basically after, 39 portal entrants when he came from James Madison and decimating the James Madison roster, taking all his good players with him, getting a quarterback from Miami of Ohio, and adding in a bunch of transfers. Now the transfer portal is bad, and NIL is ruining the game. And he threw out a $40 million number with a bunch of blue bloods on it. Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, and there's two others, and Texas Tech. What do you think about a sitting head coach there, Kyle, complaining so openly that A, they're poor, and B, something that helped him so much the year before is now bad because it's not helping him as much?
I think on the portal aspect of it, in terms of just the era of college sports that we're in, if you're complaining about that, all it signals to me is that you're behind the times, which is kind of weird with him because, like you're alluding to, he used it much to his benefit last offseason. But to me, it's kind of like being, I don't know, like showing up to work in 2020 and being like, well, I don't want to use Zoom. Well, this is the way the world works now, and everybody has to do it or you're going to get left behind. On the NIL front, I think a lot of coaches, I don't know if this is the best way to do it, but I think a lot of coaches make these public statements about how rich everyone else is to try to prod their own donors and boosters into basically saying, like, we have no chance whatsoever against Ohio State and Oregon in conference unless y'all up the ante. So again, I don't know if that's the best route to go about it, but that's also a reality that a coach at a place like Indiana or like Mississippi State or Iowa State or wherever is dealing with. Is like you're not paying top dollar like some of your peer level competitors are. And I could probably sympathize with his frustration in that realm of like just feeling helpless, knowing that there's no recruiting pitch you can make. You probably can't even get a guy on a visit unless there's a certain dollar number you can reach. And so it's like competing against the Dodgers in Major League Baseball in a lot of ways. So I don't know. I kind of get his frustration more on that one. I don't know if that's the best way to go about trying to get your NIL budget boosted a little bit. But I think if you're complaining about the portal, you're just kind of a moron and signaling to everybody that you're not willing to adapt and play by the new rules that can be advantageous for your program. And you're just kind of old man yelling at clouds at that point.
I just the middle to bottom shelf in the SEC and the Big Ten, I will never care what they have to say because they went along with all this realignment. They were happy to cash these TV checks. They were happy to kill the Big 12. They were happy to handshake with the Pac-12 and the ACC, and all these presidents were happy to say, "Oh yeah, we're in alignment. We're what do they call it? A scheduling alliance. We're in an alliance with these conferences," and then red wedding them and slit their throats with Walter Frey and murder all of them. And the Pac-12 is dead, and the ACC is about to implode, but maybe not. While they're sitting there clearing $100 million checks a year for the next 10 years. So it's hard for me to have any kind of, poor Big Ten school that gets to clear $100 million in the revenue sharing era that is coming. And that's another thing that's killing me. They're complaining about this 1 year, and if the House settlement goes through in a week or two, like none of this stuff he's complaining about is even a thing anymore because you're going to have to go through clearinghouse and you can't spend $40 million anymore. So he's complaining about this one off season. So spare me the woe is me pity crap, Big Ten school. You're going to clear $100 million, and if you can't afford it still, maybe you should look at your own budget and figure out how to play college football like the rest of us. Because we've been behind for a long time. We're going to continue to be from behind. And now that we lucked into a couple of dollars here, we're going to use it to our advantage just like everybody else has been. So spare me, Curt Cignetti. Google yourself. If you want to figure out how to be so good and win all the time, you should be able to do it regardless of what your roster looks like, regardless of if you're getting left behind in the NIL world. Oh, and by the way, Texas had more money than everyone in the last 15 years and went to the playoff twice and only in the last 2 years. And Oregon has had more money than God for 20 years, and they have 0 national championships to show for it. And Texas Tech now has a $40 million roster. Well, they've never won a conference championship in the Power 5. So let's let some of this track a little bit before you just complain. I think the only team on that list was Ohio State that had just won a national championship. Nobody else is doing anything with it. So tell me again how NIL cures everything except for the fact that Ohio State had the most expensive roster and won last year. But let's get a little more skins on the wall before we just start saying NIL's killing everything. Because from what I could tell, Georgia wasn't using NIL better than anyone else, and Alabama wasn't, allegedly, for the previous 10 years, and Clemson never used it. And those are the teams beating everybody for 20 years. So, I don't know. Spare me. Go out and win.
I like the way John Kurtz frames this in his Big 12 newsletter, that it might seem hypocritical to some if you're a fan of a Big 12 school and you're like rooting for your conference, and then you're also clowning on the SEC and Big 10 for doing the same thing. But it is a double standard. And the way Kurtz frames it is, if you're in the Big 12, you're fighting for survival at this point. If you're Indiana, you're flush with cash because you happen to be in the same conference as Ohio State and Michigan 100 years ago. That's it. Like, you didn't do anything else as an institution or as an athletic program to deserve the windfall of cash you've received from your latest TV deal. And so the fact that, like, we're playing from behind, we're trying to just stay on the same playing field as the Indianas and, I don't know, other mid-level Power 2 programs across the country. And like, by the way, fully within the confines of the rules. Like, we're not doing bags of cash in McDonald's bags. Like, it's not allowed. At least for now, it's within the confines of the rules. And they have the gall to be like, oh, well, no. Like, you're not supposed to be able to do that. It's the only thing we can do. And it wasn't by our choosing. Like, we don't want half the TV money that y'all get. You didn't do anything to deserve it. You're not the one leading that. That's Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State. And so, I don't know, to me, it comes across as very much like sit down and know your place. Like, you're not supposed to have a roster like this. You're not supposed to be recruiting like this. Well, why not? Like, football means more, I would say, to the average Texas Tech fan than it does to the average Indiana fan. No, we didn't luck out. We weren't in the same conference as Alabama and LSU 100 years ago. If we were, we'd be in the SEC, just like Mississippi State and Vanderbilt or whoever. So, yeah, like, we're fighting for survival. While it's allowed in this form, we're going to do whatever we can to win. Then whatever the next iteration of this looks like, I'm sure Cody Campbell and the administration will do what they can to keep us competitive. It may be harder, it may be easier, depending on what happens with this Power 2 versus the rest of everybody divide. But no, I'm not going to make any kind of apology for Texas Tech doing whatever they can under the current system to win as many football games as they can, try to get into the playoff, yada, yada, yada. And I think it's kind of weak for a guy like Cignetti to complain about it.
Let's say that Texas Tech does have a $40 million roster. Let's just say that's true. And let's say that's 100% NIL money. They got what, 42 was the TV payout for the Big 12? Something like that.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
So with NIL money, you're at 82. And let's say the Big Ten payout 76 this year, on its way to 100 in the next couple seasons. And let's say Indiana has a $15 million roster. Who's spending more money? Or who's more flush with cash, right? It's still the Big Ten schools. So I don't know. It doesn't bother me at all. And you don't see me complaining about the Big Ten and crying about the SEC. I just want to go win the Big 12 because that's where we are. And that's been my position for 2 years.
Well, if Curt Cignetti and head coaches and ads at basically at any program that isn't like a top 8 or 12, like if you're not on the list of Notre Dame, Ohio State, Texas, etc., if you're anybody else in college football that is clearly not on that top rung of cash and brand, then like we would have the votes to band together and say, okay, you don't want Texas Tech money whipping you in the portal, then let's do a salary cap. Everybody gets equal payouts from the college football TV revenue, just like they do in the NFL. Like every franchise gets this. Maybe you get a little more from ticket sales or merchandise sales, and that's where the brand power comes in. But like you want to compete on an even playing field with Texas Tech, fine. I think everybody in the Big 12 would welcome that. You give us the same TV dollars that you get, and we'll be happy to implement a salary cap, and we'll quit overpaying or inflating the market in the portal every offseason, and you'll have just as equal a chance at signing Lee Hunter or Reggie Virgil, David Bailey as we did. But in exchange, we're going to get on a true even playing field. And of course, they would never take that deal. So you can't have your cake and eat it too. Pick one or the other, but you made your bed, now you can lie in it, and we're playing by the rules. We're maximizing whatever we can do as a program right now in this current phase of college athletics. And so, yeah, in my opinion, there's no whining about it because y'all are the ones who chose for it to be this way.
Buddy, have any thoughts on Curt Cignetti?
I just really like the points that both of y'all are making up because I had this thought the other day, just laying in bed, trying to fall asleep, and kind of came to this realization of, yes, like obviously NIL has benefited programs like Alabama, Ohio State, Duke, North Carolina, Michigan, whatever, right? The biggest powerhouses in college sports have obviously gotten stronger by having more available resources to them than what they were already using before. That makes sense. Of course, that was going to happen to some degree. But I think if you look at the tier below that, right, and really think about like when this legislation was introduced, I think you either had one or two thoughts, which is, yeah, those big, strong programs are just going to get super elite, or there's going to be some teams on the fringes that have a really good chance of, now that they have more resources at their disposal, punching a step up. And like somebody's going to take advantage of this and play exponentially better, have higher expectations than historically they've had, whatever, however you want to categorize that, right? Who's going to kind of punch above their weight? And I think obviously you have to win games with this roster next year. There's no other way around it. Can't go 7-5 next year and think that this is a success, a pattern that you should continue to follow blindly, whatever. But if you win games with this team next year, which I, as an amateur, casual onlooker, think you will, because there's so much talent here, I don't think there's a program and a university as a whole that has a better case than Texas Tech for being that program on the fringes, taking the opportunity as best they could. I don't think anybody has seized this moment like Texas Tech has. I mean, again, as a very casual onlooker, it is crazy to see On3 publishing 3 official visit articles for Texas Tech guys in 1 week that are like bona fide blue chip prospects, like high ranked 5 stars, 4 stars, and then obviously what you've done in the portal. I mean, you are receiving buzz at a scale, for what it's worth. Again, I think there's an argument there. but you're receiving buzz that you do not receive historically. And I think there's a good chance, again, it'll be interesting to see how the market as a whole has perceived this. But if you go into next season with a preseason ranked basketball team, which I think you will, you weren't this past season. You probably should have been, and you were right on the fringes of doing so. But what you did this last year is probably going to give you some dividends there. And if the market as a whole thinks your football roster is good enough to be ranked in the top 25 preseason, which it seems like a lot of outlets have taken note of, you're going to have a preseason ranked Texas Tech basketball and Texas Tech football team for the first time in history in the same year. And like, that's not even mentioning what you've done facilities wise. It's just wild. Like, it's really cool to be like a fan of the team that has best seized this moment. Cause I don't think there's many other better examples that you can point to.
I don't think there is either. And I was thinking about that the other day. You know, who should be outspending or outdoing Texas Tech? I think Ole Miss has done it longer. They've been very good in the portal. And Lane Kiffin is a guy who is doing this, you know, talking with his right hand and doing things with his left hand kind of guy. No integrity, one might say. He's this kind of guy instead of this kind of guy. But you look at Lane Kiffin and he complains about the portal all the time. And then he has top 5 classes in the portal every offseason. And I think Chris Beard and their basketball program will be able to do some of the same things. But I don't think they're on the level of what Texas Tech has been on. At least the gap from previously and to now. Of course, you look at those like Robert Kimdichie classes, and then they got in trouble for them because they were cheating. But and then you start looking at like an Arkansas. They should be what Texas Tech is in the portal. They did sign a bunch of basketball portal guys last year, but I haven't heard anything about Arkansas in the football portal. You look at maybe some other teams in the Big 12. Colorado has signed a bunch of guys, but they're not anywhere close to where you are in the portal right now. So it just feels like, especially in the Big 12, you're just so far in a way better than what the Big 12 is doing. It's really impressive, and I'm excited for it. Now, will that translate? Is Joey McGuire a good enough coach to make it translate? Are Leftwich and Wood good enough hires to do what they can with this roster in the Big 12? Did you sign the right guys? We have chemistry. Is there too much new to come together soon enough to be great? I don't know. Those are all questions you have to answer in the football season, but I don't know that anybody had a better offseason than Texas Tech did. All right, Kyle. We're talking defensive line today. Did you want to focus on the rooms or just the portal entrance from those two positions?
Mostly just the portal additions.
Okay.
So about a month ago, we had an overview of the 3 interior defensive linemen that came in on Patreon. And then yesterday did the same with the 2 edge rushers. So this is something that kind of has always triggered me. When I was growing up, Rob, you had defensive ends, and they were, if there was a distinction, it was, this guy's more of a 4-3 end, this guy's more of a 3-4 end. And then it was like, well, some of these are like 3-4 defenses, but you basically have your defensive end. He just doesn't have his hand in the dirt, but he's an outside linebacker because it's a 3-4. Then they just started calling these guys edge. And then Tim DeRuyter, I feel like on the depth chart, it was edge/outside linebacker. And we had quote-unquote outside linebackers that were 275 pounds. It's like, when I was growing up, an outside linebacker was like 240, 245. So I'm calling this the defensive line, both the interior spots and whatever you want to call it, the defensive end, edge, outside linebacker, the guy who lines up outside of the defensive tackles and who's rushing the passer off the edge. Call it whatever you want. So this is not necessarily a total position room overview because it doesn't discuss the guys coming back, but just kind of more in-depth on the portal ads because they were coming in so fast and furious when that December window was open. Y'all remember how it was. You get like 3-4 stars in one day. You barely had a chance to see who Howard Sampson was, and then the next thing you know, Lee Hunter is committed and so on and so forth. So I guess we'll start on the interior, if that's cool with y'all, and then work our way outside to the edge. I think the big get on the inside was Lee Hunter, 6'4", 325 pounds. He is a redshirt senior. This will be his 5th year of college football. Actually started off at Auburn and then made some hay in Orlando the last 3 years at UCF. Consensus 4-star guy on 3 24/7 Rivals all had him as a 4-star. Kind of ranges top 15 nationally, according to On 3 last time I looked. That goes up to number 81 nationally on Rivals, so kind of a big discrepancy there. He's the number 1 defensive tackle, according to On 3 in the portal. So at this position group, you added the top available talent, according to one outlet. Rob, Ryan, either of you, finish this sentence for me. Lee Hunter is the best defensive tackle on a Texas Tech roster since.
You know, I'm a Jalen Hutchings guy. But I would say since probably Broderick Washington.
Okay. That's a good one.
Before that, it'd be Kerry Hyder.
Okay. Yeah, I was kind of thinking Kerry Hyder, Dartwan Bush. So this was kind of a common theme among a lot of portal guys. They all had kind of interesting high school careers. So Lee Hunter, the aforementioned 325-pounder, actually caught 9 passes for 149 yards and a touchdown in high school. Also ran for a touchdown. He's a grown man. He has a 5-year-old daughter. I'm 32 and I have a 3-year-old daughter. I cannot imagine taking college courses and playing sports and having a 5-year-old, but he does. So I think you're banking on. This is one of the fascinating things about college sports. You might have a Tracer Lopez who should be at his high school prom right now, and you might have a guy who has a 5-year-old daughter, and they line up across from each other on Saturdays in the fall. What I find most intriguing about him is the production in terms of tackles for loss. He has back-to-back seasons in this conference with double-digit tackles for loss. We've only had 3 individual players in the last 5 seasons that had double-digit tackles for loss once, and that was Jacob Rodriguez. He had 11 last year. Muddy Waters had 13 in 2022, and Tyree Wilson had him back-to-back 14 tackles for loss his last 2 years here. So pretty good company to be in terms of defensive playmakers that have been on this roster in the last few years. What I find interesting is none of them were interior defensive linemen. You have an edge rusher, a star, and an inside linebacker. So this is a guy who's produced at a really high level in this conference. I think you would certainly welcome double-digit TFLs from your interior D-line next year, and he might be a guy who can deliver that. I don't remember if Joey said this or if this was a tweet from Don Williams or somebody, but I did have this noted. He was clocked at 16.5 miles per hour in spring practice one day, which is not like blazing speed. I think 20 is considered like fast, but that's for like position players. If the heaviest guy on the field is moving 16.5, that's probably a pretty good sign. Let's see here. Some PFF notes. First off, he's played a lot of football, so he's played 500-plus snaps each of the last 2 years. I think when you had not so much depth here, and it was Hutchings and Bradford, they were playing like 600 snaps apiece. So he's a really experienced player. I have this in the Patreon article. In 2023, he was quite literally the most productive interior defensive lineman in the entire country in multiple respects. He led the nation among defensive tackles in both tackles with 51, and stops with 41. His run defense kind of regressed year over year from 23 to 24. He went from leading all defensive tackles in both of those categories in 23 to finishing in the roughly like top 10 to 12% nationally in 2024. So still really good there. And his pass rush.
That roster
yeah, go ahead.
quite a bit around him.
What's up?
That UCF roster changed quite a bit around him from 23 to 24.
Yeah, no, I figure if you're that disruptive of a player,
Yeah.
you then become the focal point of every single opposing game plan the following season. So to get the extra attention and still be a top 10 or 12% level player you're at your position is pretty good. And we'll get to this, but with the depth and talent you've accumulated across the defensive line, they're not going to be able to just zero in on Lee Hunter next year. His pass rush, so his run grade kind of regressed a little bit from his junior to his senior year. His pass rush actually improved, and I think y'all would agree with me. We could use some pass rush at all spots. I think that's usually incumbent on the edge rushers, but I would take some pressure being generated from the second level or the interior. He only logged 1 sack last year, but he went from 16 hurries in 2023, which is about top 10 or 12%, to 19 hurries, quarterback hurries in 2024, which is about top 6% among defensive tackles. He was also up from 22 pressures in 2023 to 27 in 2024. That was the second most among all Big 12 defensive tackles. So all that to say, you're bringing back a guy who's played in this conference for several years, has been productive in this conference. And like, had he been on your team last year, you would have had top 3 or 4 guy at his position group. And you get him another year older. Who knows what kind of strength and conditioning differences there are between Texas Tech and UCF. But this is a huge piece, in my opinion. I think Jalen Hutchings and Tony Bradford were asked to hold their own and did a really good job of that. I think DeBraylon Carroll was a sneaky good ad last year. He was maybe not at the same volume as some other guys, but probably your most disruptive and productive interior guy. You had to deal with the due to Banks injury. So you really could have used a guy like Lee Hunter last season, but I'm glad he's coming in this year, and I think he could be, starts up front, starts on the interior. I think he could be a focal point of this defense, but not in a way that like he's going to overshadow the talent on the rest of the defense, because I think you have some really good players at various levels on this defense, but also certainly not a guy that opposing offenses can just ignore or not account for. And I think and hope if this production translates, you're going to see a really good run stopper at a level you haven't had in several years, and also hopefully some added pass rush from the interior to supplement, hopefully, an upgrade on the edge as well.
I think what makes me excited about him is just those years where Hutchings and Bradford were just like the best part of your defense, like, I don't know, 65% of the time. And like that was the most exciting position group that you had on the field. And like now, right, like nose tackle, defensive line, interior defensive line, it's a gritty position. It's not sexy like edges or like outside linebacker or corner. Like they're doing the dirty work at the line of scrimmage. But it's such an important position when you have the right talent around that. And that's why I'm like even more excited about what he brings to this team, because again, I think the pressure that his teammates are going to generate is only going to benefit him.
Yeah, I mean, like, let's say he's lined up next to David Bailey and it's 3rd and 8, and the opposing team is going to draw back to pass. I think in an ideal world, somebody's helping the left tackle with David Bailey. If that's a tight end, then that means that's one fewer weapon that you have out on a route. If it's the left guard, that means Lee Hunter's one-on-one with the center. Like, these are the kinds of positions you can put your defense in to stress the opposing offense that I just don't think you've had the luxury of doing the last couple years. And what I'm really intrigued by is you've had elite play from Jacob Rodriguez at inside linebacker, and a player like Lee Hunter just should clean things up, make things that much simpler for Jacob Rodriguez to play downhill. And so I'm kind of curious the domino effect that a player like this has on freeing up edge rushers, freeing up inside linebackers to come shoot the gaps. I think this could be a really, really good addition for you if he matches anything close to the production he's had the last 2 seasons. As much as I like Jalen Hutchings and Tony Bradford, if I pulled their PFF grades and production, I don't think they were ever top 6%, top 10%, top 12% at their position. They
Right.
filled in admirably, and your
Yeah.
defensive line used to be atrocious, and they certainly got you several levels above that, but I don't think they were quite the same caliber of player that Lee Hunter is when he's operating at his ceiling.
No, for sure. And I think that just builds the excitement for me is like, yeah, you've seen what this can look like when it's serviceable. And even that was like pretty exciting. Now imagine what happens when you put an actual elite national piece in that position.
For sure. Rob, anything else on Lee Hunter?
Yeah, I ranked my top 20 transfers in order of impactfulness today. And a guy I'll talk about in a second's one, and he was in the top 5 as well, just easily, and maybe 2. I'd have to go back and look, but I'm very, 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 very excited about Lee Hunter.
Yeah, I haven't sorted it that way, but I feel like if I did, it's likely he's top 3. A couple red flags, just to be fair, so I'm not doing all sunshine pumping. If we look back at this episode 7 months from now and he wasn't a high impact player or difference maker, one red flag that I have is in 2023. He cleaned it up a little bit last year, but in 2023, only 10 defensive tackles were penalized more than Lee Hunter. And there was a little bit of regression, like I alluded to, in his run stopping production year over year. Nothing major. And again, I think it's probably just because he was commanding more attention. But I'm just trying to present a little bit of the other side as well so that it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Let's see here. Skylar Gill Howard is the next one. Rob, you I think said he's the next Aaron Donald. Do you want to tee this one up at all before I get into some of the in-depth notes on SGH?
I don't know that's exactly what I said, but I did say he has a similar frame as far as a little bit undersized, but former linebacker, and he's a guy who played the MAC, so a lot of his production is against the MAC. But I'm intrigued to see what you think about his production even beyond the MAC, because I think he played really well. Maybe his 2 best games were against Notre Dame and NC State last year.
Yeah, definitely a different body type than Lee Hunter. So SGH is 6'1", 290. And if you watch his tape, he looks quicker laterally. He's more slippery, more agile. So they're different types of interior defensive linemen. I think Lee Hunter is, he's going to plug some gaps, take up a lot of space, eat some blocks. SGH might be a guy that's a little more disruptive in the pass rush, things like that. Yeah, I think a late bloomer and a rapidly ascending athlete. So in high school, I think he was a tight end, and like you said, Rob, linebacker. Didn't put on defensive line level weight until he got in college. Actually started out Division II at a school called Upper Iowa before moving to the MAC. But we get him in Lubbock as a 4-star transfer according to On3. They have him as the number 5 defensive tackle in the country. Then he was a 3-star at 24/7 and Rivals. His high school notes are interesting to me. 2-time Wisconsin State Wrestling runner-up and a 4-time All-District football player. He's gained 60-plus pounds since high school. So again, a guy who used to be able to move a little bit more. He can still move really well, but moving a little different, playing other positions in high school, a wrestler. So I think you've got really elite level athleticism for an interior defensive lineman here. He is the oldest of 10 siblings. So again, you talk about kind of being a grown man in college, having a 5-year-old daughter, having 9 younger siblings. I have no clue what that's like. I'm the youngest of 2, but I imagine you grow up quick when you're the oldest of 10. And another 5th-year player, so you're getting a really old, experienced guy. He, interestingly, kind of played situationally at Northern Illinois. Was not a full-time starter. He did get starter level reps. He played, I think, 400 plus snaps last year and was a team captain. But like, if you look at his game started, it's like 2 or 3. He was not a full-time starter. Despite that, he was first team All MAC according to one analytics service, second team All MAC according to PFF, and officially, I don't know if this was media or coaches, but third team All MAC when the official list came out. So, here's a not so fun tidbit, but since Pete Robertson, who played here a decade ago, other than Tyree Wilson, who was, of course, a top 10 pick, Texas Tech's sack leader each season since 2015 has had 5.5 or fewer sacks. Skylar Gill Howard had 5 sacks last year, which I think is notable, A, playing from the interior, and B, doing it on far fewer snaps than a lot of guys that are full-time starters. So if you're like, let's say he's the second best defensive tackle on this team, and you've got an equally good, maybe better pass rusher in Lee Hunter sharing the interior with him, and then 2 or 3 edge rushers that are also better pass rushers than him, you have a guy who's potentially your 4th or 5th best pass rusher on the team, whose production is equal to what has been your number 1 pass rusher most seasons over the last decade. That's where I think it's not just the talent that you added in the portal, it's the depth, and that you didn't get one guy who has the potential to produce at a certain level. You stocked like basically every single position with multiple guys that can produce at that level. He had some really intriguing and encouraging PFF grades. So he was number 6 nationally among all defensive tackles in the FBS and in tackles recorded last year. Number 8 nationally among defensive tackles in stops. Every single player ahead of him who ranked in the top 7 played more snaps than he did. Number 8 nationally among defensive tackles in quarterback hits. He was tied with Lee Hunter, interestingly enough. Number 11 at his position in PFF for his run defense grade, and number 14 nationally at his position in overall PFF grade. That's out of like 500 plus defensive tackles in the FBS who logged a certain number of snaps. I think I filtered it at like a couple hundred snaps. He and Lee Hunter both played almost exclusively in the B gap at UCF and Northern Illinois, respectively. And like you said, Rob, put out some good tape against Notre Dame and some of the higher level competition he played against. I think that's the big question when you take a guy from Conference USA or the MAC. Is like, okay, even if he was productive at that level, is it going to translate? Small sample size, but he certainly seemed to hold his own against Power 4 opponents in limited snaps at Northern Illinois. So potential red flags. He's listed at 6'1", so he's probably 5'11" and a half. And that's fine. I think that can even sometimes be to your advantage if you're a certain style player as an interior defensive lineman. But I think if he was 6'4", 295 instead of 6'1", 290, he's probably a little bit more highly regarded as a prospect. And it is a little bit strange to me that as good as some of those PFF metrics were, that he wasn't able to break through and earn like a full-time starting spot at Northern Illinois. Maybe that was a formality, like a Duchetter situation where like effectively your starting pitcher is the guy who comes in second, and he matched the starters in snaps. So maybe that's nothing, maybe it's something, but I think it's worth noting. I think that's all I have on SGH. Did I miss anything that y'all want to add?
No, I like that you have 2 styles there, if those are the 2 starters. And I'm very intrigued by Anthony Holmes as well, who you're about to talk about.
Yeah, I might have messed up his classification. I'll have to double check this. I'm showing that he was at Houston for 3 years.
Yes.
I've got him listed as a redshirt senior, which that math isn't mathing.
He's a junior.
Okay. So he's kind of in between in terms of body type. He's 6'3", 300, and I think was a bit overshadowed. He's coming in as a 3-star according to all 3 of the outlets, not as highly ranked at his position. But another multi-sport player in high school, played baseball in high school. He he has some kind of connection to Ed Oliver. It seems they attended the same high school. He wears Ed Oliver's number. He went to Houston out of high school, so I think that's probably, if they don't know each other and like don't train together, I think that's his idol. A good athlete to look up to if you're a defensive tackle. His tackles for loss tally. This is what I like. He's seemingly an ascending player. The last 3 seasons, his TFLs have gone from 1 to 5 to 9. Would love for that to make another 4 TFL jump to 13 this season. And of course, he's played in Coach Shilwood's system, having also come over from Houston. He so he did redshirt in 2022, but he played the final 4 games plus the bowl. So we actually got about a 5-game sample size of him as a redshirt freshman. And I don't think that was a very loaded Houston team or anything, but he did finish in that small sample size as the highest graded freshman defensive tackle in the American Conference, number 3 among all defensive tackles in the American for pass rush grade, and number 4 among all defensive tackles in the American for overall PFF grade. Would he have been able to sustain that playing 11 or 12 games? I don't know, but that's, for a freshman, I think a pretty good way to make your mark right out of the gates. As a redshirt freshman in 23, he posted the top PFF defensive grade among all Big 12 freshman DTs, as well as the top PFF pass rush grade among his position group. He was top 10 in the Big 12 among all defensive tackles in both quarterback hurries and pressures. So again, this is a guy who, even though he's not an edge rusher, I think will enhance the overall pass rush and take some pressure off of just the edge guys being relied on to do all of the heavy lifting there. Redshirt sophomore last year, he was top 3 among all Big 12 defensive tackles in both quarterback hurries and pressures. He ranked in the top 5 or 10% of all FBS defensive tackles in hurries, tackles, and stops. So in that respect, similar to Lee Hunter in terms of a guy who's done it in this conference before at a high level. His 3 best PFF grades last year in terms of individual game grades came in his last 4 games of the season. So I think he was, again, ascending, kind of trending better as the year wore on. That's always a good sign. Unlike Hunter and SGH, he wasn't exclusively a B gap guy. He lined up in the A gap, B gap, and over tackle all roughly a third of the time. So I think this is a guy, if he does emerge as like a better pass rusher or situational player versus another defensive tackle, they can move him all over. It seems like his defensive coordinator has had some level of trust using him that way previously. So I found some high school film, and similar to SGH, he looks very nimble, very agile for a 300-pounder. He was probably a little lighter back then, but still. He was able to dunk at 285 pounds. You know James Blanchard loved that. That was probably instant offer the second he saw that video. He can dance. Again, he's good on his feet. There's a video clip of him dancing for like an NIL promo ad on social media. And he ran a 4.8 in high school. Again, a few pounds ago, but I think he's a natural mover. And if he can still have some of that mobility with the added weight, to me, he's an exciting player. Like, again, he got overshadowed by the first 2, but just reading these profiles to me sounds very much on par with the other 2. And so I think in that respect, he's a guy that might surprise some if he's competing with them for playing time or potentially outproducing one or both of them in the fall. I'm not saying it will happen. I'm saying if it did, it wouldn't surprise me that much. And I think this is a guy that, maybe only so many guys can be the headliners of the portal class, but this speaks to the depth you're adding. And like, if this was one of the 3 or 5 best guys you added in the portal, I think that would be awesome news. But he's seemingly, from a perception standpoint, buried a little bit lower than that in this class. But I still have high hopes and expectations for him. I think he's a really athletic guy. Can play different spots along the defensive line, it seems. So, yeah, the first 2 are the ones making all the noise, but I think this is a really, really sneaky good ad for you as well at interior D-line.
Again, no, I'm a little bit of a casual, but when he was added to this team and I was like watching some highlights of his film when the day he had committed to Tech, I was like, this guy's going to be one of our best defenders. Like, just watching the film, he looks so dominant. He's so good at the line of scrimmage. And it's crazy. Now in May, obviously, you have bona fide NFL draft picks that you've added since then. But I think the last point you made is like whatever role he ends up playing, you're better off because of it. I just think it's wild that a guy like this doesn't seem to be, at least to me, receiving as much press and attention as some of the other additions you've made, but he's still an elite caliber player.
Yeah, and he has a leg up in some respects over Hunter and SGH because he's not learning the defense for the first time this spring. So I don't know how much of an impact that will have or not. I think usually defensive tackle maybe not as dependent on like knowing the playbook as quarterback or receiver or something. There's only so many things a defensive tackle is asked to do. But I don't think it can hurt that, his defensive coordinator came with him and he knows the terminology, knows the coaching style. So I don't know how much that translated or not in the spring. I guess we'll find out. But he's a guy that intrigues me for sure.
All right, that is the defensive tackles. Before we get to the defensive ends, we're going to flip over to the Patreon portion. If you want to listen to the edge rushers, that's all caps, EDGE, Smart Football. That stands for Electric Defensive Generating Energy. Yep. You can join us on Patreon, patreon.com/Gambling Gauchos to listen to the breakdown on David Bailey and Romello Height. Correct me if I'm wrong. You said Lee Hunter started at Auburn. Were he and Romello Height teammates at Auburn?
Yeah, Romello Height was actually previously teammates with two other guys in the portal class.
Okay.
Lee Hunter at Auburn and Quentin Joyner at USC.
Interesting. All right, we will talk about our Romello Height and David Bailey, arguably the crown jewel of the portal class. On the other side, thank you for listening on Dave Campbell's Texas Football. Of course, we'll have more off-season topics for Texas Tech football as we move along. We'll also do full positional previews as we go through. Those will be on the Dave Campbell's site, or at least the podcast network, as we move through the offseason. We'll also do, I think, a tour around the Big 12 again. Those will probably live on Patreon, patreon.com/Gambling Gauchos when you're listening or watching on YouTube. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. We appreciate you. Thank you so much. Love y'all.